Most people walk out of the doctor's office holding a normal lab report and feel relieved. But that relief can be dangerously misleading, because normal does not always mean healthy. It often just means you are not in a medical crisis yet. That is the terrifying part. You can look perfectly normal on paper while your body is quietly moving toward heart disease, fatty liver, insulin resistance, cognitive decline, or metabolic collapse. Standard labs are not designed to look for optimal health. They are designed to detect damage that has already become visible. By the time a routine panel finally flags a problem, the real process may have started years earlier. And that is what makes this so important. Some of the most dangerous situations are not the people with obviously bad lab results. They are the people who develop serious disease after years of being told everything looked fine. Not because anyone was lying to them, but because no one was measuring the right things. If you are not looking for the earliest signs, you will not find them. That is what this is about, the blind spots. The markers most standard blood work does not focus on, and the difference between being normal and being truly optimal. Let's begin with the marker that sits at the center of almost everything else: fasting insulin. This is one of the most powerful early indicators of silent metabolic dysfunction, yet many people never have it checked. Instead, they get fasting glucose. If that number comes back at 90, 92, or 95, they are told everything looks good. But fasting glucose is a late marker. It is the snapshot of the moment, not the hidden effort your body is making behind the scenes to keep that number looking normal. A glucose result of 90 may look reassuring, but it tells you nothing about how hard your pancreas had to work to keep it there. That is where fasting insulin matters. Think of it this way. If blood sugar is the visible water level in a leaking boat, insulin is the pump working underneath the floorboards. You can look at the water level and say everything seems under control. But if the pump is working at full blast just to keep the boat from flooding, that is not stability. That is compensation. So if your fasting glucose is 90, but your fasting insulin is 25, you are not metabolically healthy. You are living in a state of overcompensation. Your body is forcing insulin higher and higher to keep sugar appearing normal. That matters because chronically elevated insulin is not harmless. It is not just a pre-diabetes issue. High insulin acts like a long-term growth and stress signal. It drives fat storage, raises blood pressure, worsens inflammation, promotes abnormal cholesterol particle patterns, and pushes your system toward diabetes and cardiovascular disease long before glucose finally rises high enough for the standard system to react. And here is the trap. Many labs still list fasting insulin values up to roughly 25 as normal. But normal in that context simply reflects what is common in a metabolically unhealthy population. Common is not the same as optimal. If you want a much better target, many health-focused clinicians aim for fasting insulin well below that, often in the single digits. Once insulin starts climbing into the double digits, the body may already be losing metabolic flexibility. That is why fasting insulin matters so much. It tells you what the pump is doing, not just whether the water level looks acceptable. The second marker is high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, or hs-crp. This one is often misunderstood because many people hear CRP and assume it is just a general inflammation test. Technically, that is true, but there is a critical difference between a standard CRP and a high-sensitivity CRP. A standard CRP is useful for big, obvious inflammation, infection, major tissue injury, a strong inflammatory event. It is a blunt instrument. High-sensitivity CRP is different. It is tuned to detect the low-grade smoldering inflammation that quietly damages arteries, fuels metabolic disease, and raises long-term risk without ever creating a dramatic illness in the short term. That low-grade inflammation matters because it often sits underneath the diseases people fear most: heart attack, stroke, insulin resistance, cognitive decline, and more. A person can have good cholesterol or a decent routine panel and still have inflammation silently driving arterial damage. That is the value of hs-crp. It is not looking for the fire after the house is already burning down. It is looking for the sparks in the walls. And the interpretation matters. Generally speaking, lower is better. An hs-crp under 1 is often considered lower risk, 1 to 3 intermediate, and above 3 higher risk, assuming there is no obvious acute illness causing it to spike. But the real value is not just in the number itself, it is in what it tells you to investigate. Elevated hs-crp may reflect visceral fat, poor sleep, gum disease, metabolic dysfunction, smoking exposure, processed food intake, chronic stress, or an inflammatory condition that has never been fully addressed. And this is one of the most overlooked points in medicine. Inflamed gums can reflect or contribute to systemic inflammation. If your mouth is inflamed, your body may be too. The third marker is ApoB. For decades, people were taught to focus on LDL cholesterol as the main heart risk number, and LDL still matters. But ApoB may tell a more precise story. Why? Because LDL usually measures how much cholesterol is being carried, but ApoB reflects the number of atherogenic particles carrying that cholesterol. That distinction is critical. A simple way to think about it is this. If you are worried about traffic damage on a highway, do you care more about the total weight of all the passengers or the number of vehicles actually driving on the road? In cardiovascular disease, the number of particles matters enormously because those particles are what interact with artery walls. ApoB counts the vehicles. Each atherogenic particle, the particles that contribute to plaque formation, carries one ApoB molecule. So when ApoB rises, the number of potentially dangerous particles rises. That means you can have an LDL cholesterol number that does not look terrible, while ApoB reveals that particle traffic is much heavier than expected. This is especially important in people with insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, elevated triglycerides, abdominal weight gain, or a history of blood sugar problems. In those situations, the body often shifts towards smaller, denser lipoprotein particles. The total cholesterol weight may not look extreme, but the number of particles may still be high. That is why ApoB can reveal hidden risk that a standard cholesterol panel may understate. Again, the issue is not whether a lab marks the result normal. The issue is where the number sits in relation to long-term optimal health. The fourth marker is the omega-3 index. This is not part of standard blood work, and many people have never heard of it. But it offers something uniquely useful. It reflects how much EPA and DHA, the long-chain omega-3 fats associated with cardiovascular and neurological benefits, are actually built into your red blood cell membranes. And that matters because this is not just about what you ate yesterday. It is about what your body has been incorporating over time. If your omega-3 index is low, that suggests your cell membranes are relatively deficient in these fats. If it is higher, that suggests a more favorable long-term fatty acid pattern. Why should anyone care? Because omega-3 status has been linked to cardiovascular health, inflammation regulation, membrane flexibility, and even aspects of brain aging. A low omega-3 index has been associated in some research with higher risk, while higher levels are generally associated with better long-term outcomes. There is also growing interest in how omega-3 status relates to brain structure and cognitive aging. That does not mean it is a magic bullet. It is not. But it is a meaningful piece of the larger picture. And unlike a lot of vague nutrition advice, this is measurable. You are not guessing whether you probably eat enough fish. You are measuring whether your body has actually incorporated enough omega-3s into its tissues over time. The fifth marker is GGT, gamma-glutamyl transferase. This one is especially important because there is a decent chance it is already sitting on your routine lab report, but almost nobody is using it well. Most people hear GGT described as a liver enzyme. That is true, but it is incomplete. Historically, GGT was treated mostly as a marker for alcohol-related liver stress, or more obvious liver disease. But over time, researchers have realized that GGT may also reflect oxidative stress, metabolic strain, fatty liver patterns, and broader issues in detoxification and redox balance. That makes it far more interesting than many people realize. A person can have a GGT that falls somewhere inside a wide lab reference range and still be showing early signs of internal stress. That is because the standard normal range often reflects what is common in a broader population, and common in the modern population includes a lot of metabolic dysfunction. In other words, The upper end of normal may not be healthy. It may simply be prevalent. This is why context matters so much. If GGT is rising over time, even while still technically normal, and especially if it is accompanied by abdominal weight gain, elevated triglycerides, poor sleep, blood sugar issues, or other markers of metabolic stress, that trend deserves attention. GGT can be one of the earliest clues that the liver and metabolic system are under pressure, long before more dramatic liver enzymes become abnormal. So what do all of these markers have in common? They are not exotic. They are not science fiction. They are not fringe. They are simply underused, misunderstood, or interpreted too casually. Fasting insulin tells you whether your body is overworking to control blood sugar. hs-crp tells you whether quiet inflammation may be simmering underneath the surface. ApoB tells you whether the number of dangerous lipoprotein particles is higher than your basic cholesterol panel suggests. The omega-3 index tells you something about your long-term membrane biology and nutrient status, not just your last meal. GGT tells you whether your liver and metabolic system may already be carrying more strain than the standard reading implies. And here is the larger point. A clean standard panel does not always mean the story is over. Sometimes it simply means nobody was reading the right chapters. That is why it helps to walk into appointments informed, not combative, not paranoid, just informed. Ask better questions. If blood sugar looks good, has fasting insulin ever been checked? If cholesterol seems okay, what about ApoB? If inflammation is a concern, was it standard CRP or high-sensitivity CRP? If liver enzymes are fine, what is the actual GGT value? If diet quality is strong, what does the omega-3 index show? This is not about chasing every possible test. It is about understanding that disease often begins years before a standard panel finally admits something is wrong. The future of good medicine is not just diagnosing illness after it has clearly arrived. It is identifying the fingerprints of dysfunction while the process is still reversible. And that shift matters because when you catch a problem early, the intervention is often simpler, the outcome is often better, and the chances of preserving long-term health are much higher. That is the real opportunity here. Not panic, not obsession, precision. So if your routine labs came back normal, that may be good news, but it should not automatically end the conversation. Sometimes normal simply means the system did not look deeply enough. And when it comes to long-term health, asking for the right markers may matter far more than celebrating the wrong ones.